real person. Maybe we have a bad connection. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, that's crazy, Esther. You just sound so much like a robot.
I am a real person. Maybe we have a bad connection. I'm sorry about that.
Will you...
There's a face on the screen. It blinks, it smiles, it talks, but something feels wrong. The skin texture is perfect. Too perfect. The voice sounds real. Too real. The eyes move like they know you, but the longer you stare, the more the illusion collapses. It's almost human, but not quite. This is the uncanny valley, the psychological space between comfort and fear, between empathy and revulsion, between something we understand and something we can't quite place. We usually think of it in terms of robots, computer graphics, artificial intelligence, but it runs deeper than that, because the uncanny valley isn't just a glitch in design. It's a mirror. It reflects something strange about us. What we're afraid of, what we repress, and what we refuse to see in ourselves. It's not just about how a thing looks. It's about how it feels to be near something that almost passes for human, but fails in a way we can't explain. Why does this gap affect us so deeply? What does it reveal about our minds, our instincts, our fears? And as technology continues to evolve, will this feeling disappear, or will it grow stronger? This is the psychology of the uncanny valley, and like all valleys, to understand it, we have to descend into it. In 1970, a Japanese robotics professor named Masahiro Mori published a short paper. In it, he described a strange phenomenon. The more human a robot looks, the more people tend to like it, but only up to a point. Once it becomes too human, but not perfectly human, our emotional response takes a sharp dive. He called this drop in comfort the uncanny valley, a dip between familiarity and eeriness, a place where we stop saying, "Oh, that's cute," and start saying, "Why does that creep me out?" Imagine a simple cartoon face, 2 dots and a smile. It's charming, innocent, safe. Now imagine a hyper-realistic humanoid robot with skin, blinking eyes, and human teeth. But something is just slightly off. The smile is a bit too wide. The blink is just a second too slow. The eyes don't track the way yours do. It's like watching a ghost try to remember how to be alive. That's the uncanny valley. Not horror, not disgust, but a peculiar discomfort, a chill that comes from seeing something wrong in the right places. Mori even drew a graph. On the x-axis, how human something looks. On the y-axis, how much affection we feel toward it. The curve rises with realism, and then suddenly dips into a valley, before rising again once something becomes truly indistinguishable from a real human. It's not just robots, CGI characters in films, realistic mannequins, deepfakes, AI-generated voices, even some virtual influencers. They all live near that uncanny edge where things are real enough to trick the senses, but not the soul. And that's important, because this isn't just about technology failing to look human. It's about us failing to accept something that's almost one of us, something we're supposed to relate to, but instinctively want to avoid. But why? Why does almost human feel more threatening than clearly non-human? To answer that, we have to turn inward, to the instincts we barely notice, the fears we carry in our biology, and the ghosts that live in our perception. Our brains are pattern-seeking machines. We're built to recognize faces, read emotions, and sense danger before it's too late. Thousands of years of survival shaped us to be hypersensitive, especially to other humans. We notice small things, a strange twitch in someone's smile, an unusual tone in their voice, eyes that don't quite focus. These aren't just social cues, they're early warning systems. If someone looks or behaves slightly off, it might mean disease, deception, or danger. This is one theory behind the uncanny valley, that it activates an ancient threat detection system. We feel disturbed, not because the thing looks non-human, but because it looks almost human, and that almost feels like a threat. Think of a corpse. It's recognizably human, but lifeless. It triggers a visceral response, not because we hate it, but because something about it feels wrong. The eyes are open, but no one is home, and our instincts panic. Some scientists call this the mortality salience theory. The uncanny reminds us of death, of lifelessness pretending to be alive. It brings us face to face with the thing we try to forget, that the body can still exist even after the soul is gone. Others suggest a different explanation: disease avoidance. Many pathogens, like viruses or neurological disorders, subtly distort the human face. Slight asymmetry, unusual movement, dull eyes. We evolved to notice these signs, even unconsciously, to avoid infection. So when we see a robot that moves awkwardly, or a CGI face that blinks too slowly, our brain isn't confused. It's warning us. It's saying, that looks like sickness. That looks like danger. Stay away. Then there's the predator disguise hypothesis. It suggests that the most dangerous threats are those that look like us, but aren't. Mimics, imposters, creatures that evolved to blend in until it's too late. The uncanny valley may be a byproduct of all these instincts colliding. Our biology flags the not quite human as untrustworthy, not because we're cruel or irrational, but because, long ago, misreading the difference between human and almost human could have meant death. We didn't evolve to understand CGI or androids, but we did evolve to detect when something or someone doesn't belong. It's not just a visual problem, it's a deep, subconscious reaction, one we feel in our body long before we put it into words. But not every explanation comes from biology. Sometimes the uncanny comes from the mind, from the things we repress, the things we hide, and the feeling that maybe we don't fully understand what it means to be human in the first place. That's where we turn to Freud, and to the idea that the uncanny isn't foreign, but familiar in a way we'd rather forget. In 1919, Sigmund Freud wrote an essay titled The Uncanny. In German, he used the word unheimlich, which literally means unhomelike, or more precisely, something that was once familiar and has become strange. For Freud, the uncanny wasn't about robots or machines. It was about the mind, and more specifically, about what the conscious self tries to hide to him. The uncanny emerges when something repressed suddenly returns, when something that should have stayed hidden comes back into view, not as something new, but as something we recognize deep down: a child's doll staring from the shelf, a figure that looks like someone we know, but not quite, a mirror reflection that moves a little too late. A doppelganger. These aren't just eerie, they're uncomfortably familiar. Freud believed the uncanny reminded us of childhood fears we never outgrew, fears of inanimate things coming to life, of being watched, of being copied, of being replaced. In a way, This makes the uncanny valley not a technological glitch, but a psychological one. It's not about a robot being too realistic. It's about the idea of imitation, something pretending to be alive, something mimicking us. Too well. Freud even suggested that the uncanny could symbolize the return of the double, an idea that used to represent protection, like a twin, a shadow, or a guardian angel, but over time came to represent death, madness, or the breakdown of the self. When we see a humanoid robot that moves awkwardly, or a digital face that looks almost alive, maybe part of our discomfort isn't just instinctual. Maybe it's symbolic. Maybe we see a copy of ourselves, an echo, and that echo reminds us of our fragility. It reminds us that we can be duplicated, simulated, replaced. That the boundaries of our identity, our selfhood, are not as solid as we think. Freud would say, the uncanny reveals what we've tried to forget, that we're not as in control as we'd like to believe, that the mask of being human is thinner than we pretend. And when we stare into the eyes of something almost human, we don't just see a robot, we see ourselves, hollowed out, stripped of soul, reduced to surface. That's what makes it uncanny. Not that it's inhuman, but that it's too much like us. Imagine standing in front of something that looks like a person. It breathes, it blinks, it moves like one of us. But something inside you knows this isn't a person. It's an android, a machine dressed in human skin. And suddenly, you're not just uncomfortable. You're uncertain, not about it, but about you. Because the uncanny valley doesn't just disturb us, it destabilizes us. It threatens the very thing we rely on every day. Our sense of being human. A robot that looks like a vacuum cleaner doesn't bother us. It's a tool, it's separate. But give that robot a face. Give it expressions. Let it say your name in a soft, familiar tone. And suddenly, it enters the realm of the social, of the intimate. And something in us resists. Why? Because when a non-human acts human, it creates identity dissonance. It breaks the line between what is me and what is not me. And that boundary, the one between self and other, is foundational to how we navigate the world. When that line gets blurred, we start asking dangerous questions. What makes me real? Is it my body, my thoughts, my emotions? What if all of those can be simulated? A robot that acts like a person isn't just eerie. It's existential. It makes us wonder if we're really unique, or if we're just a sum of patterns and behaviors waiting to be copied. This is the quiet horror at the heart of the uncanny valley. Not that machines might become human, but that being human might not be as special as we thought. It's why we fear being replaced. Why deepfakes unsettle us. Why AI that mimics emotion feels like a kind of betrayal. Because we've always drawn a clear line. There's us, the real, the alive, the conscious. And there's them, the artificial, the programmed, the soulless. But now, that line is fading, and we don't know where we stand. Are we the original, or are we just the first copy? The uncanny valley isn't just a dip on a graph. It's a wound in our idea of selfhood, a tension between what we are and what we fear we are. Not divine, not sacred, just replicable. And maybe that's the true discomfort. That the android doesn't remind us of something inhuman. It reminds us of the parts of ourselves we wish weren't so mechanical. The habits, the routines, the scripts, the things we do every day without thinking, like machines. If the uncanny valley lives anywhere today, it's in our screens. Movies, video games, animation, virtual influencers, places where artificial humans are built pixel by pixel. And strangely, the more advanced the tools become, the more careful. Artists are not to cross a certain line. They know the danger of going too far, of chasing realism so closely that the illusion collapses. Take animation, for example. When studios try to make characters hyper-realistic, down to pores and muscle twitches, audiences often recoil. They call it creepy, cold, off. But when the same studios embrace stylization, big eyes, soft faces, exaggerated movement, those characters feel warm, relatable, alive. Why? Because stylization creates distance. It tells our brains, this isn't real, it's a representation, and we're okay with that. But when the design gets too close, without being perfect, our brains enter conflict. Part of us wants to believe it's human. The other part notices the cracks. This is why movies like The Polar Express or Beowulf made audiences uncomfortable. Not because the characters were monsters, but because they weren't quite people. They lived in the uncanny valley there. Eyes were glassy. Their skin was rubbery. Their expressions were stiff. And even though the creators pushed for realism, what they ended up creating was unease. Horror directors, on the other hand, lean into this. They want you to feel that discomfort. Films like Ex Machina, M3 Gan, or Under the Skin use near-human characters to disturb us, not through violence, but through imitation. When a character looks and sounds human, but behaves just a little too perfectly, we feel something deeper than fear. We feel wrongness, the sense that something is wearing a human mask. Even puppets and mannequins used in low-budget horror rely on the uncanny. They don't move, they don't blink, but the stillness itself becomes a kind of threat, because we expect movement, we expect life. And when it's not there, or worse, when it suddenly is, it shatters our understanding of what's real. This is why the uncanny valley works so well in art. It bypasses logic. It cuts straight into emotion. It uses the human form against us, not by making it monstrous, but by making it almost normal. And that almost is enough. Artists know that realism has limits, that what we're drawn to isn't always perfection, but believability. Something can be less realistic and feel more alive. That's why Pixar characters don't look like people, and why they don't need to. We trust them because they exist, clearly outside the valley, and in contrast, hyperreal avatars and deepfake influencers keep wandering into the uncanny, looking too real to ignore, but too false to trust. The uncanny valley doesn't just unsettle us because it's strange. It unsettles us because it exists between human and non-human, between life and lifelessness, between what we recognize and what we don't want to, and anything that exists between categories has always disturbed us. In mythology, these in-between figures are everywhere. The golem, shaped like a man, but soulless. The doppelganger, your double, but not you. The revenant, the corpse that walks. The changeling, a child replaced by something not quite right. They all live in a symbolic, uncanny valley. Creatures that imitate humanity, but can never truly become it. They blur the line between person and thing, between self and shadow. Psychologically, we fear this space because it disrupts identity. It exposes how fragile the boundary is between who we are and what we pretend to be. There's even a word for this space. Liminality. It means the threshold, the place between one state and another. Not here, not there. In transition, the uncanny valley is a liminal zone. Something looks human, but not fully, feels real, but not quite. It lingers in that weird middle where things are supposed to pass through, but instead gets stuck. And when something gets stuck in that space, it becomes uncanny. This is why we fear masks, mannequins, wax figures. They're frozen mid-transformation, lifelike but lifeless, trapped between being something and being nothing. Even in dreams, the uncanny often appears as partial forms: a person with no face, a voice without a body, a smile that lingers too long, symbols of something that should be whole, but isn't. Carl Jung saw these symbols as expressions of psychic fragmentation, pieces of ourselves that don't quite fit, parts of the shadow, the unconscious rising to the surface, but not fully integrated. The uncanny valley, in this view, doesn't just disturb us because it's inhuman. It disturbs us because it reflects the parts of ourselves we deny, the mechanical, the imitative, the empty. A humanoid robot doesn't just mimic life, it parodies it. It forces us to ask, what part of being human is performance? What part is real? The valley reveals the cracks in our categories, not just between human and machine, but between self and other, living and dead, real and unreal. And that's why it haunts us, because it reminds us the categories we build to feel safe, to feel sane, are more fragile than we think. And sometimes all it takes to break them is a smile that's a little too perfect. The uncanny valley isn't just a curve on a graph. It's a psychological terrain, a place between recognition and rejection, between trust and fear. At first glance, it seems like a simple problem. Make robots look less creepy, make AI sound more natural, smooth the skin, fix the blinking, adjust the smile. But the discomfort doesn't live in the face. It lives in us, because what we find uncanny isn't the machine itself, it's the way it makes us question who we are. A robot that looks human is strange, but what's stranger is realizing how easy it is to look human. How much of us can be mimicked, how much of what we call humanity is just rhythm, tone, reflex, repetition. The uncanny valley unsettles us, not because the imitation is bad, but because it's almost good enough. It pushes us to ask questions we usually avoid. What makes a person real? Where does empathy begin? What happens when the lines between tool, self, and other start to blur? And most of all, are we afraid of the machine or of the mirror it holds up? Because in that mirror, we see our own mechanisms, our programs, our predictable emotions, our rehearsed personalities, the parts of us that already function like code. And that's the deeper valley, not between human and robot, but between the self we think we are and the self we can't explain. Maybe that's why the uncanny hits so hard, because it isn't just about machines trying to be human. It's about the creeping suspicion that maybe we're not as different as we hoped. In the end, the uncanny valley isn't out there in the wires, the circuits, the blinking eyes. It's in here, in the gaps we carry, the contradictions we live with, the selves we construct, and the fear that beneath all of it, there may be nothing truly human at all. Or maybe that fear is what makes us human.